Today we're talking about The Anthologist by Nicholas Baker.
And How I Became a Famous Novelist by Steve Hely. And I'm going to give you a little synopsis about The Anthologist first. So The Anthologist is about this mopey poet named Paul Chowder. Doesn't his name even sound a little bit mopey? So Paul Chowder is trying to finish an anthology of poetry, and he cannot. He cannot edit it for the life of him. He just does not want to do it, or there's something wrong, basically. There's something stopping him. In the meantime, his relationship breaks up because of this, and his girlfriend moves out, and which makes him more mopey. But throughout the novel, it's a kind of wonderful slice of his life as he goes through why he loves poetry and why he doesn't love some of it, but how he can't live without it, basically.
But even the stuff he doesn't love, he loves.
Exactly. He
talks about it as something that's in opposition to, you know, it's all about expanding his mind. The stuff he doesn't love, he talks about it in opposition to the stuff he does love.
Exactly.
And how it helps him define what he loves.
Exactly.
It's lovely. And I am going to tell you a little bit about how I became a famous novelist. Hopefully someday that'll actually be true words.
Could happen.
Yeah, not so much. Anyways, this is a story about Pete Tarsalaw, who is sitting around alone writing resume letters for kids getting into Ivy League colleges who can't write their own letters, and writing his own work and not succeeding, and so he decides he's going to go strictly commercial and proceeds to go through the New York Times bestseller list and draw up a list of all the things that are in those novels and write something that includes all of those things.
He finds the formula.
Yes. And then proceeds to go on.
To create a bestseller, basically. I mean, it's a bit slogging at first, his bestseller, but he manages to get enough media attention that he ends up getting onto the bestseller list.
As we can see, I was reading it thinking of Mr. Million Pieces.
Oh yes, James Frey.
Thinking about how, despite the fact it comes out the big scandal that, it isn't actually his biography, it goes on to sell even more.
Oh yeah.
Stop. And that's sort of how...
That's kind of what happens to
not that it's biography,
the Pete Tarsalaw character. Yeah. So what's interesting about these two books is that they are extremely different, but interestingly, I read them back to back, and they were surprisingly similar in theme.
Yeah.
Even though they're kind of arguing from a different viewpoint, basically. Yeah. And I love when books do that, so that's why, it was great that it's great that we're actually doing these together.
And they're both wrestling with the same thing, of commercial value versus artistic value. And, the famous novelist one, he's talking about how novels get valued only based on how they sell, and
yes, and how wrong that is, basically. Yeah. But in order to make money, which is what he wants, well, actually, what he really wants
is to be famous and get his girlfriend back.
Yeah,
stick it to the ex. I think
stick it to his ex at her wedding. Basically, his deadline is her wedding.
Has to be famous
by the time he goes to her wedding. So it's pretty funny. I mean, you kind of hate him for that part because it seems so childish.
But at the same time, who hasn't been there?
And he's hilarious as he goes through it. Yeah. And Steve Hely tells the story in this kind of bits and pieces way, where he inserts parts of different fictional writers' novels, and inserts little ads and stuff, and it's very funny. It's very satire on the publishing industry too, which is fun.
I thought the funny part about both of these books, though, is in the end it was about moving through your artistic malaise and finding the girl that you love.
Yes, it's true, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
So the theme that I found most engaging about both of them is how the pop culture world of writing is undervalued, or is it undervalued? Like, should we be valuing the writers of sitcoms and movies more than How I Became a Famous Novelist, Steve Hely, or Nicholas Baker, or whoever, right? these things are part of our everyday life. We watch them all the time. They breathe life into our day sometimes.
And people are creating, whether or not, you know, so many people don't want to see that as creating art, and it is creating art. Maybe it's momentary art and it's pop art,
yeah,
but it's still art, and it's still work to create it.
Yes, and it's funny because, I mean, you're never going to know the name of a writer that wrote your favorite Friends episode.
Yeah,
you're never going to know the name of that person, but I mean, maybe in 50 years they will, because maybe that stuff will be important in the future.
I love, I was reading an article in some magazine the other day, and this guy who writes for The Simpsons was saying how he hates to go to parties because somebody will say, oh, what do you do? And he'll be like, oh, I write for TV. Oh, I don't own a TV.
Yeah.
And so he went to a party, somebody says that to him, says, oh, well, I've just written an academic novel, or an academic look at, I think it was Thomas Pynchon's works, blah, 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 blah. And the guy goes, oh, well, I just talked to him. He phoned me to tell me how much he enjoyed such and such an episode of The Simpsons. And he walks away.
That's so awesome.
Like, that's it. I'm not talking about it anymore.
So, yeah, I mean, both Steve Hely and Nicholson Baker mention pop culture writers, or the importance of being mainstream or making money in their books. And I just found it, well, I mean, I love The Anthologist because it actually made me want to read poetry again.
Yes, I had like a list. It's like Poetry 101.
It's like, it is Poetry 101.
Yeah.
And so just for that, this novel is like brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean,
it does a nice breakdown. It talks about the influence
everything.
of the future.
I mean, you're reading iambic pentameter as you're going through the novel. It's brilliant. I mean,
and it's teaching you enjambments and all of that sort of stuff. That the basic building blocks that you need to truly appreciate poetry. Yeah. But that people don't necessarily have unless they study poetry.
Yeah. And I mean, not everybody does, right? And that's why most people don't pick up and buy
some of us just sell it.
That book of Mary Oliver's poetry that looks so nice on the shelf, because I mean, they do look so nice on the shelf. And he talks about Mary Oliver all like throughout the novel, so it's quite funny because I mean,
I like his little discussion about rhyme and whether or not rhyme is of value, and also I think
his plums.
Yes, but I think the other interesting thing he talks about is music and how people don't want to see in this time music as poetry, but if you look at sort of the commercial use of poetry and include music, then we're selling more poetry than ever.
Yeah.
Versus, you know, the years when people truly loved poetry.
Exactly.
And poetry.
And what's the difference, right? There is no difference. It's just that you're not buying a volume when you listen to that.
Well, and he talks about breaking down poetry to the lines that he loves. It's like, you know, poets. He starts out with poets only write one or two good poems, and then, you know, really in those whole poems, there's maybe 3 or 4 good lines, and breaking it down like that. Yeah. So maybe that's part of the appreciation of music.
Yes.
But I'm sure the true poets will all be like turning over in their graves right now.
I know.
So Matt, if you're watching, I apologize.
Sorry.
Although you're less judgmental, so there's a few poets that I know who won't like that. But you probably won't be watching because this will be on TV.
Or YouTube, even worse.
Close enough.
What else?
I don't know. Enjoy them. I thought they were lovely. So
poignant, chuckle, intelligent chuckle, funny. Kind of snarky, but also hilarious.
But you know, and my reservations are, I have little reservations about both. Nicholson Baker's such a good writer. I felt like this wasn't his best work. I was a little sad at times. I was waiting for it to be just a little more Human Smoky.
Oh, but you can't compare it to Human Smoke.
No,
I mean,
but the language. I was waiting for it to maybe tighten up a little bit in some places. There are some times where I was like,
well, the reason why I can let all of that go is because the way it's written, both of them are written as kind of memoir-ish novels, right? Yeah. So you're reading as if Paul Chowder's written this book and as if Pete Tarzan's written this book, right? And taking that into account, like taking the voice into account for both of them, I have to let it go because it's totally Paul Chowder.
Yeah.
You know?
And you know, I had a similar but opposite reservation with this one. Sometimes I'm like, okay, I get it, you're funny.
Oh yeah, like
Come on.
a bit like banging it over the head with the
and
funny.
I felt with both of them that they had a bit of that going on.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
You're a mopey poet.
Yeah. No,
I get it.
and that's
this one I'm like,
that's
okay,
true.
come on,
Move along with the plot line now.
But they're both worth reading, and I hope you find them and enjoy them in your local independent bookstore.